Welcome to today's blog and video. I'm so excited to have you guys here. I'm your host, Maria Ross, and today we are talking about motherhood and entrepreneurship, motherhood and work, and that fine dance, that juggle, that balance. We'll have a whole conversation about that. If you are trying to figure out how to get it all done, if you're trying to desperately to give 100% of yourself to everything that you're doing, this is the video for you. So I hope you will stay with us and talk to our fantastic guest, Sara Dean. Hi, Sara.
Hello. I'm so happy to be here.
Thank you for joining Red Slice Nation today.
So excited.
I know. We are a community of rock stars and change makers, so you will fit right in because you are indeed a rock star and a change maker.
Thank you.
For you guys who don't know Sara, let me tell you a little bit about her. She is the creator and host of the Shameless Mom Academy podcast, which has been featured in 5 categories in iTunes, new and noteworthy, for almost 2 years. She's rapidly approaching 1 million downloads. What? Sara's biggest passion is helping women own their space. And after she had her own identity crisis after the birth of her son, who's adorable, by the way, and just side note, I love that he's a year older than mine because you give me like a view into what's
sneak
coming.
Peeks.
I know. And I'm like, sometimes it's awesome and sometimes it's terrifying. But after she had this identity crisis, which many of you as moms or new moms or thinking back to when you had your kids can totally relate to, she took her background in psychology and health and wellness. She used to own a very popular gym in Seattle that she just recently sold. And she rebuilt her identity one step at a time. And she's helping other women through her podcast reap the benefit of those lessons learned. She has fantastic guests on her podcast. It's awesome.
Like Maria Ross.
Oh, you're so sweet. Thank you. Like, tee up that one, right? Sara motivates and inspires women to stop thinking and start growing, which I really love. And she's on a mission to inspire women and moms in particular to live bigger, bolder, and braver every damn day. Hashtag every damn day. So Sara, welcome. I'm so excited to talk to you today. It's always so much fun to talk to you. And just to give folks a little background, how Sara entered my orbit is, I think I knew about you, but we really first met when we spoke. We gave keynotes at Urban Campfire several years ago. Is that right?
Yes. So fun.
Right. I know. And that was awesome. It was like a TEDx style talk. And you gave a great talk on very similar topics.
As did you.
Right. Thank you.
Yeah. I was actually talking, I talked about a number of things, but it was similar to some of the stuff we're talking about today.
Yeah, absolutely. And I got pregnant like literally a month after that event,
oh my God.
By the way. So it was so crazy that like worlds colliding. But so I want to just kind of cut to the chase. And we were joking before we started recording about my total mother fail day of like, I wasn't like quite getting my work done. I have like renovation going on in my house. And then I completely like spaced on my son's doctor's appointment, like raced into his preschool like a crazy person. I think I scared like all the kids in there, grabbed him out of there. And then it turned out he couldn't go to his doctor's appointment anyway. So it was just one of those days. Right. And so can you talk a little bit about, I mean, we're going to dig into a lot of specifics, but what kind of advice can you give or lessons did you learn as you were starting the delicate balance of figuring out how to run your business and be an entrepreneur and also get this new identity as a mom and deal with that responsibility and that a whole other job?
Yeah. I had a really pretty picture in my mind of what motherhood and entrepreneurship would look like. And it took me a long time to get pregnant, and which was very emotionally challenging. But one of the gifts of that was that it gave me all this time to set up my business so that I had things really laid out and planned in a way where I was like, okay, once the baby comes, I will, these are like the things I'll have to do for work. And I can just do that while he sleeps, cause he'll sleep like at least 6 hours a day or something.
Of course.
And, or I can like be nursing him in a little sling while I'm like returning emails, like all these beautiful, magical, like unicorn moments that had gone through my head for like 3 years by the time I had him. Mm-hmm. So then he's born and he's kind of a mess. I'm totally a mess. We had a lot of nursing issues. He was a screamer for like 2 years. It was like all these things happened. I ended up having some health complications postpartum that impacted me for about a year. Mm-hmm. And so all these things happened, and it became really clear really quickly that I was not going to be able to sit with a napping baby snuggled in a baby Bjorn while I returned emails. And I didn't know how to manage that. I was like completely at a loss. I was like, that was my only plan. So instead, I was like, he would be on me screaming as I'm like trying to return emails, and I would get so frustrated. And my husband would tell me like, I'll be home at 5. And if he was home at like 5:02, the world had ended. And so after that first year, I really had to check myself a little bit and acknowledge like, this is not what I planned on. And I need to get over that. Like this is not the picture I expected. And also, what do I want this to look like? And by that point, I had really wanted to be home full time. By like 4 months in, I was like, that's not going to work. Like this sucks way too much.
No,
yeah. So we had a part-time nanny, and she was really great. And so I kind of worked on like what that schedule needs to look like. Could I still work at home with the nanny there? Or did I need to actually leave and get out of the house? And there was all this navigation around that. And it took me, after about that first year, I finally gave into the fact that like, this is not magical, and what the heck are you going to do with it? And so then I got a lot more clear on, here's how I'm going to divide my time. Here's what my work time looks like. Here's what my family time looks like. Here's how I can have boundaries around those things. And it's still like, I mean, there's still times that it's not perfect, but that's when it started to evolve in a more positive direction, rather than it just being like every day, how's it going to work today? And feeling like I was always failing or falling apart.
For sure.
And so that started to feel much better then. And then I started working on like blocks of time. Like, okay, today I have 4 hours. I have 8 hours of work to do in 4 hours. What are the 3 things that will lead to revenue? Focus only on those things. And even when he was really, really little in that first year, and I had such little time, especially in those first few months, I did kind of the same thing where I thought, okay, there's 37 things I need to do today. What's the one thing that will lead me to revenue or to growth in my business? And so I would just do that one thing. And that meant that 36 things didn't get done. And that was how I kind of prioritized every day for a long time, was like, what is revenue generating activity? And what does that look like today?
Well, and I have a quick question about that, because I think this is true of a lot of entrepreneurs, solopreneurs, especially like me, but you especially, like you were a personal trainer, right?
Right.
So what can you do when you're not actually personal training somebody that can generate revenue, right? Like for me, it's like, unless I'm consulting or teaching or speaking, me sitting at my desk is not, now I have products and stuff, but I didn't at that time.
Yeah.
So what did that, to give some advice to people watching, like what did that actually look like for you? Like, can you give an example of one thing that you would do that would generate revenue that you were able to get done in a given day? Because that's so important to time management, whether you have a kid or not, right?
Yes. So, in the 2 years it took us to get pregnant, I had hired people to work for me kind of with this long-term goal of that, like, I will not be the only person in my gym providing services. Okay. So then, and that was again, one of the blessings of it taking so long for us to get pregnant, is that by the time he was born, that I had a lot of people pretty much doing all the hands-on stuff for me. So I did not need to be on site.
So you'd already scaled in a way.
Yes, I'd already scaled. Okay. My advice to people, so I had a friend who was a massage therapist, and when she had her first son, she had told all of her clients, because she was only making money if she was actually massaging people.
Right.
So she had told her people, like, I'm going to be back in 2 months, so like, she didn't want to lose business. So she's like, I have to take off the smallest amount of time possible. And what ended up happening is she went back after 2 months, and she was still like in like the throes of horrendous nursing everything and all that. And she's like, it was awful. She's like, I'm leaking on people. Like my boobs hurt. Like, she's like, it was just horrible. So she really warned me, like, don't make any promises. And so I learned from that. And that's my advice to other people, is like, don't make promises around that. For mothers and fathers, do not make commitments, because you don't know what your newborn experience is going to be. I have plenty of friends who have like magical babies that will sit and nap on them. That was not my experience. And a lot of my friends didn't have that experience either. So don't make promises. And then from there, look at like, if your time is super limited, if everything gets thrown upside down, you do prioritize the things that move you closer to the goal that is most significant to you in the moment. And so that looks different based on where you're at. If all of a sudden you're like, wow, I can't be hands-on doing massage and that's the way I make money, then you quickly have to pivot and think like, okay,
what can
I hire someone else to do this work and I get a cut of it for the next couple of months? Like, what's a quick shift that you can make? Or can I, like, instead of going, for me, one of the things I did is I used to go into the gym a lot to do I would do like group trainings when we did transformation programs. So I would go into the gym and do a lot of like talks around nutrition and mindset and how to have exercise to have a better impact in your life. That all moved to Zoom. So I did all the, like, that's going to be via freeconferencecall.com on a phone call with groups, or it's going to be on Zoom so that I could do that in the evening, but not have to go into the gym. So I could like have dinner with my family. So there was a lot of pivots that took place to where I could kind of serve both goals, like my family goals and my business goals.
Right. And how do you think, like, this is kind of a macro question, but what do you think modern motherhood looks like for people? And you and I remember on your podcast, we talked about this whole thing about the idea of this magical, like, it's actually not magical for like 4 months. It kind of sucks for 4 months. We're like, oh my gosh, you know, is it just, do you just like stare at your baby and are you in love with them? Like, I'm just trying to survive. Like, right now, you know what I mean? I'm trying to like figure this whole thing out and like figure out which way is up. And like, and I took 4 months off. Like it was a luxury. Yeah. So I think that there's this ideal, but I also think that there's a difference in what modern motherhood looks like. So can you comment on that at all? Yeah. And I'm sure I know it looks different for everybody, but what would you say it looks like today for the women that you know? Yeah. And the entrepreneurial women that you know. Mm-hmm.
So what I love about modern motherhood is I think it looks like whatever the heck you want it to look like. And that's really different than when my mom was raising kids. And that's, I mean, even than it was 10 years ago. And so I will admit that I know that I choose to expose myself to people who are pretty progressive. And so I don't know that I can't say that it's like this for everyone. I know there's a lot of people who are still very much operating in a very traditional model of like a mom and a dad both work Monday through Friday, 9 to 5, and there's childcare around that. And that's all very hectic and stressful and chaotic and expensive. And so I understand that a lot of people are in that experience, but even within that experience, I think there is so much more space and grace for women. And again, I think I choose to expose myself to people with progressive views on this, but I think that it's swinging so much in such a more positive direction. And I think you probably see this too, Maria, where there's so many conversations around women's value in the workplace, and that actually motherhood makes you a more valuable employee because you've never multitasked in your life or had to learn different forms of communication in your life or had to pivot more in your life. Then
my negotiation skills are like
right.
Top-notch
You're
now.
like, I could write a Middle Eastern peace treaty.
Yeah, exactly.
And so like, I mean,
like, serious.
Why are men always the president when like mothers negotiating power? Like it sounds like a big joke, but I mean, totally serious.
So true. I
think the president should be a woman who had like 6 kids because the negotiation that would go on in that household all day, every day, like you could literally solve world peace.
Yes. Yes.
And so I think that these are the conversations that I see happening more and more, progressively and more prominently that I think are so exciting. So I think modern motherhood looks a lot more like moms having all the space and grace to shamelessly go after whatever the heck they want. And for some moms, that means they want to be lawyers who work 70, 80 hours a week. And mostly their children are being raised by nannies and they want to like have dinner with them and kiss them goodnight every night. Cool. That's your choice. And then for other women, that looks like I want to stay home with my kids and do art projects all day. Awesome. Go for it. Like it can be either of those things and one isn't better than the other.
Right. And I love that. I think there is a lot more flexibility, and this might be a very controversial statement I'm about to make, but I almost feel like women are starting to get more of that flexibility than even men are allowed to have.
Totally.
You know what I'm saying? Like, not that there's not a lot of inequity and that women don't have, I don't want to get all your hate emails about like women have so far to go. But really, when you think about it, like we have the option of staying home or going to work for the most part, like notwithstanding financial issues, but like lots of scenarios are acceptable and open to us right now. Whereas I still think we have a ways to go in like how we perceive dads,
Yeah. So like, it's socially acceptable for a woman to desire that corporate climb.
Yes.
For the corporate husband, corporate father, corporate dad to desire to be stay at home.
Right.
That's total. People are like, what?
Right.
And I've worked with men who've done that. And they're like, yeah, like we're treated like we are the creeps. Like no one wants to do play dates with us. They're like, what's up with the dad coming to the play date?
Totally.
Like, I mean, it's literally like they are
Totally.
treated like they are child molester. Like,
Right.
well, why does Jimmy's dad want to have the kids over to play?
Right.
And I mean, the obstacles that they face, it's very much like on par with what women have faced trying to climb up.
Right.
So I totally agree with you that
Right.
I think there's the latitude for women, I think is really expanding in amazing ways. And I don't know that that's happening for men.
It isn't. And, you know, you can tell a lot in terms of like paternity leave policies and things like that, where it's like, you know, why are you taking 2 weeks off to be home with your newborn? Like, isn't your wife home? Like, you know, that kind of thinking. And I think that there's room for us to redefine parenthood. But what I love about these conversations is we are going back to, I felt like in the 80s and 90s, when women were fighting so hard for this, there was this backlash. Like, women almost couldn't even mention they were mothers in the workplace, right? Like couldn't say. And now I feel like we're finally getting back to this thing where it's like, no, like, it's okay to take 3 months off maternity leave and be home with your baby. And like, you want that, you know, people are talking about bonding time. They're talking about things like paternity leave. They're talking about these emotional needs that we have around taking a slight pause from work, whatever that is, whether we're an entrepreneur or we're working in corporate. A good friend of mine wrote a book called Work, Pause, Thrive, which is about how women could take a break from their careers for motherhood or elder care or whatever it is, and not lose their momentum in their careers. And so I love that these are the conversations we're having, that we're pulling that pendulum back a little bit, that you don't have to be all work or all family. Like, let's try to find a way to balance this, which kind of brings me to, I'd love to talk about like things you've learned. You've talked to so many guests with your podcast, about this idea of balance. And just to preface you giving us your advice or the best tips you've seen or how you approach it, can we just talk for a second about why I hate the term work-life balance? And I think you know what I'm going to say, right? Like, there's no such thing as balance. Like, to me, I think it's a myth, because balance implies you're giving equally to all these different areas. And that means, what are you giving, like 11.1% to your job, your kid, yourself? I feel like it's about prioritization. Like, different things are going to take priority. If you've got this huge project or you're doing a launch, then maybe, you know, you're going to have to work an 80-hour week once or twice. And maybe like your family might have to go to the background during that particular moment in time. Then you reprioritize, right? Like you adapt to the situation. And so I'm curious what you think of that. And B, I guess let's just call it balance for lack of a better term. Like, what have you found that's really helped you juggle so that you feel like you're giving the best of yourself to your work, to your family, to yourself as you go along?
So to speak to the first point about balance, I agree with you that balance is not real. And I like to think of things, Lewis Howes, are you familiar with Lewis Howes? So Lewis Howes has a podcast called The School of Greatness. And I've heard him talk about, he has a background as a professional athlete. And I've heard him talk about the seasons of an athlete. And he talks really nicely about how there's seasons of rest and recovery, and there's seasons of building up, there's seasons of competition. And so that's a great analogy, whether or not you have an athletic background or not, a great analogy of like kind of a natural progression in things. And so there's absolutely times where you're like going to have to go all in and hustle. I cannot stand like the hustle and grind. And I think so many male entrepreneurs connect with the hustle and grind mentality, and it's not my jam at all. But I also will acknowledge that there are weeks when I have to hustle and grind, and I'll have to say to my husband, like, okay, like this week is kind of going to be a tough one. And oftentimes it's funny because it'll be things that like I'm excited about, and I'll find myself kind of passing it off to him like, okay, this week's going to be kind of tough. And then I'm like, but it's because cool things are happening. Like I have to like kind of sell him on it.
Yeah.
Right. So there's times when there's this hustle, and that's normal, and that has to happen, and the balance will be thrown off. And then there's other times where that's not happening. And so, you know, like for us this summer, I think we have like 5 or 6 little mini vacations where I'm going to be taking Vinny. My husband will be on some of them, but not on all of them, where I'll be taking Vinny and doing like 4 or 5 day weekends. So there's definitely been weeks, especially in this gym transition of selling a business, there's been weeks where it's just been like complete overwhelm and complete exhaustion and many more hours than I'm normally used to working.
Mm-hmm.
And then this summer, there will be weeks where I work like 3 days a week. They might be kind of chaotic. And then 5 days of the week, I'm going to be like at Cannon Beach. And
Right.
So,
right. But that's that thing about shifting priorities. It's like not trying to equally distribute all the time.
Right.
It's I think that's what drives people literally insane.
Right.
Is this notion that like, if I'm playing 8 roles in my life, like wife, mother, entrepreneur, whatever, that I have to like do all of those roles every day in an equal amount.
Right.
Do you know what I'm saying? And like, so I love that and I think you kind of stumbled on what I think is key and what's been key for me. And I try to get better at it every day is you've got to plan. You've got to be able to plan ahead, because if you really are trying to fly by the seat of your pants every day, you are going to like go to bed that night feeling like you got nothing done.
Right.
So, what are your most effective like tips or tools or even like systems that you use to plan, everything, plan the work, plan the.
So I can show you. I can show you a great example. Let me see. Let me find a really impressive looking page here. So let me find something that makes me look really amazing. So I have a notebook that I keep, and it's broken up. I'm trying to find an example that will show up well on camera. I weekly make lists of 3 different categories of like things to do. And so here's one here.
And what are those categories?
So the top category, I'm like making sure there's nothing personal on here.
Yeah, exactly.
So
it's kind of fuzzy. It's all good.
The top third of the page here, this is gym tasks for the week.
Okay.
Now this is not like check email, like blah, blah, blah. This is like activities that lead to revenue production.
Okay.
So it's like very tangible action steps. Then the middle third here is podcast stuff. So this is all for the Shameless Mom Academy, steps for taking the podcast to the next level. So reaching out to the guests, like literally, who are the scariest people I want to email to ask to be on my show this week? That's what goes on here, because that's the stuff that otherwise I'll pretend I don't remember that I want to do.
Exactly.
And then the bottom third is family stuff. So it's like, book the hotel for Cannon Beach, call the dentist, whatever. It's not like grocery stopping and do laundry, because like those things are going to happen. Like people run out of clothes and the food won't be in the fridge and like I'll remember. So these are like very goal-oriented things. Everything's related to a goal. So like booking a hotel at Cannon Beach, that's a family goal to go on this trip. So it's very goal-oriented stuff. As I do things, I check them off. If on Friday I haven't done them, it gets a circle so that I know to carry it over the next week.
Okay.
And then on this side here are my wins. Some of them are directly like this thing got done, so now it's a win. Right. Sometimes there are other things like, oh, this great person reached out to me about the podcast, and so now I'm going to book them. So that goes over here in the wins column.
Right.
This particular week, we didn't have any family wins apparently. But so this is like how I manage. And also it gives me like every time I have a moment between things where I'm like, okay, I have an hour between this call and that call. What do I need to do? I immediately can look at this and be like, oh yes, that's like this action thing that has to get done this week, rather than being like, oh, I have an hour. Like, let's check in on Facebook and then people.com, which is my favorite celebrity website, and like scroll through email and like doing all those things. So it keeps me like really action oriented to track things. And it's just old school pen and paper. So that's one of the ways.
Do you put those tasks in your calendar? So you actually have like a block of like, because sometimes what I'll do is like, if I have to book like the Cannon Beach hotel,
right,
I'll actually put it like on Wednesday. I've got a free afternoon.
Like Wednesday at 3.
Here's 15 minutes. I'm going to do it. Do you do anything like that?
I've started doing that for some things.
Okay.
I historically have not done that, but I've started doing it for more and more things. I've also started setting more reminders. I've done that more with reminders on my phone, where like in the morning, especially things I think of while Vinny and I are getting ready for school, and I'll be like, okay, I know I have a break from like 2 to 4. So I'll set reminders like at 2:00, call dentist, like schedule Instacart delivery, whatever.
Right.
So then I get a ding or whatever at that time to remember to do it.
Got it.
So sometimes I'll do those things that way, but yeah, sometimes I'll put them in my calendar, especially if I need blocks of time for them.
Right. So I want to shift gears here. What do you think? So, we talked a lot about sort of like mindset and time management, expectation setting when you're a mom or dad, I guess you're an active dad, managing your own business, your entrepreneurship, your work with parenthood. What do you think I'm sure you have opinions on what others can do to support working moms, entrepreneurial moms. Is there anything that you see others can do, or even like systemically what we can do? So I guess societally, what do you see as like the driving things that would make things easier and help these people thrive, help them thrive more in their businesses and be more successful?
I think a couple things that we can do that are not like super connected to building your profession, but I think would systemically go a really long way in supporting women building professions or men building growing in their professions, is really check ourselves on our judgment. And like when you see someone on Facebook put themselves out there, give them a heart, love their post, put a comment on there like, wow, that's amazing. Just like little, instead of being like, she's always doing amazing things, or she's always like, instead of falling into a comparison trap or a judgy place of like, why are they always posting about that? Like, I remember one of my cousins at one point who's not on social media much. And she's like, why would I want to see what people ate for lunch all over Facebook? And I'm like, I love seeing what people ate for lunch. I'm so nosy. So she, and that was kind of a reminder to me that like, when I see something that resonates with me, support people. And that's kind of those examples are specific to social media, but like being supportive, or when you know someone, when one of our close family friends, they had their third child, and this mom is choosing to stay home with 3 kids under the age of 5. And every time I see her, I'm like, I'm so in awe of you. Like, it's not, I don't ask her like, well, when are you going back to work? And what do you want to do next? I'm just like, and I literally am in awe of her. Like, that's so I let her know. So I try like really acknowledging people for where they're at right now, acknowledging people for putting themselves out there, acknowledging people for kind of owning whatever they're doing. And then on the other side of that, own what you're doing. Like whatever you're doing, own that. And, I just put up a post on social media an hour before this call that I'm sure people are going to look at it and be like, oh my God, she's so into herself. And it was a long post about why I'm selling my gym and the impact that being a fitness business owner has had on me in the last 16 years. And I know there's people who are going to look at it. I posted an amazing picture with it that I just got done professionally. I'm like, I know people are going to look at this and be like, really? And on the flip side of that, I want to model what I think women should be doing. If you have a major accomplishment, let people know. I'm not going to apologize for building success. I'm not going to apologize for selling a business. That's a major lifetime milestone for me. So when I put it up on social media with this like great picture, I want to be able to stand in pride with that. And I'm hoping people will support me. And if they don't, that's on them. It's not on me. That's on them. And I think that the more we can be supportive of each other and the more we can own our space and own our decisions and own what we're doing, the more it evolves systemically for everyone.
Yeah, no, I think that's great. I mean, obviously the whole concept of support and empathy is very close to my heart because I'm currently writing a book about empathy in organizations and brands. So, but yeah, I think it would go a long way to just helping even those that are trying to, those of us that are trying to figure it out and trying to balance it. Like, if we want to celebrate our success on social media or by telling a friend, it should feel safe to do that.
Yeah.
It should feel, and it's just like you said, if someone's taking that the wrong way, something's going on for them.
Right. And check yourself. Like if you feel that when you see those people and you're like rolling your eyes every time they post, check yourself, like check it. And it doesn't need to be like, I'm an awful person, but just like from a place of curiosity,
right?
Like why is that that way? Why does that kind of trigger me?
Right.
And then think like, is there something that they have that I really want? I'm a little bit like nervous or insecure about how to go about getting it.
Right.
Like that's often the case. There's definitely people I follow on social media who sometimes I'm like, when they post their success, I'm like, oh, damn them,
Yeah. We've all been there. I mean, because I have to say, like, there's times, depending on what's going on for me, when I see people sharing good news or sharing success or whatever, that I roll my eyes, but I know enough to know what's going on, what's triggering me. Like, what is that about for me? Like, am I feeling really bad about myself this week? Am I like having did I lose a client? Am I just like, am I not hitting my numbers? Like, What is it? And if you need to take the break, like just side note on that, take the break. Like I was off personal Facebook for Lent and it was glorious, I have to tell you.
Right.
Like I had to be on it for my coaching program and for my business page, but I got really good about going straight to my notifications and not even clicking on my timeline.
That's so amazing.
I was so happy for 40 days. Like, you know what I mean? And so like, but I need to investigate that. Like you said, I need to be curious about why that is.
Right.
Like, where am I and what, you know, so looking at that for yourself. And I wrote a blog post, I think it was like 2 years ago now, about how to look at your competitors, to learn from them and get inspired by them rather than to fall into that jealousy trap. Like there's a way to do that without going into this downward spiral of shame and self-loathing.
Right.
And so, you know, look at things about like, wow, that's great for her. What did she do to get that? Maybe I can emulate that. Or like, oh, I see, you know, she's got this super successful podcast. And, you know, I was lucky enough to see you from day one when you started.
Oh my gosh. I think you were like one of my very first guests.
I think I was. And you were
maybe the very first.
Like, you know, like and people that see you now might not see that journey. It's the same thing when people look at Marie Forleo, for example.
Right.
And go like, oh my God. And I get tons of branding clients that go like, I want my brand to be like Marie Forleo. I'm like, no, you don't. You want your brand to be you, but you want that success. You want that influence.
Right.
But like, I remember when she was filming stuff on her webcam in her house, like, you know, so we forget that there's always a story behind what seems to be like an overnight sensation or someone that we're like, God, I want to get to that level. Great. But you can't go from 0 to 60. Like you gotta pay your dues a little bit too and put the hard work in. And so I think we forget sometimes when we see all these like great images and great things on social media, we don't see the hours and years of work that went into that. Do you know what I mean? And so like, it's just that, like you said, it's that you check yourself.
Right.
You know?
And start identifying like what, you know, and maybe this is where you see people in their blog posts, on their podcasts, on Facebook, whatever, but start identifying when you have that gut reaction where you're like, jealousy, envy, whatever, start recognizing like, what do you admire? What do you like about what they're doing? What do you admire? And so for me, there's been some people where I'm just like, this is just not my jam. I need to unfollow because it's just like making me cranky and that's not right. But then there's other people where I'll check myself and I'll say like, wow, I really like the way that like they speak honestly. I love their use of sarcasm, their humor, whatever.
Right.
And then I'm like, okay, note to self, like that's the direction I want to be going.
Exactly.
And that's really great. And so, I mean, there's people that I learned from. I mean, I started following Glennon Doyle Melton. It was like, I loved her and I hated her because everything she wrote, I was like, everything is magic. Like her, the way she writes, the words she chooses. And I was like, someone was like, you're going to really love her. And then I was like, I mean, I do, but also I hate her because everything she writes is so damn perfect. And so now when I read her stuff, I just get excited because I'm like, oh, this is making it more clear to me what I want my voice to be like. I don't want her voice, but there's pieces of what she does that really resonate with me. And how can I make that a part of what I do? Exactly.
I love that. So what do you do with I mean, obviously now you've got just the podcast you're going to be focusing on, but
all in.
What do you do with your business and your platform to support moms, entrepreneurial moms, working moms? I mean, clearly with you, it's a very direct correlation.
Yeah.
But what do you think some folks watching could do with their business or their platform to help support women and support working moms?
So one of the things that I do, I'm really clear on when I have guests on the show. So I get a lot of inquiries now from people, oftentimes from publicists that are like, my client has a great new book and blah, blah, blah. And it's like, every book is about, because my show is called The Shameless Mom Academy. Every book is like something special about motherhood. And there's a lot of overlap between the books. And I'm like, I can't like have the 13,000th book about why motherhood is amazing and you should embrace it more, whatever, or lessons of motherhood. So granted, there's like really great things in each of these books that are said. And also every woman has a really great story. So when I look at, when I'm deciding like who I'm going to highlight on the show, who I'm going to have on as guests, now I'm like, what's the story? Cool that you have a book to promote. We can touch on that, but I'd like to talk about your story. And one of the first times I did this, or one of the ways I felt like I really best did it, I had a colleague who'd been in the online fitness space for many years. And I had always watched her from afar. I mean, speaking of like people that you look at with envy, I had watched her from afar for a long time and been like, oh, everything she does is just amazing and I'll never be like her and blah, blah, blah. And so I also in my mind had kind of like decided that she probably wasn't that nice because she's so popular. Like whatever, she's probably really bitchy.
Yeah.
So I had like this whole story in my head.
Yeah.
She had relaunched her website, rebranded herself, and kind of moving a little bit more away from fitness and a little more into lifestyle stuff. And in her bio on her website, she mentioned her divorce that she'd gone through like 14 years ago or something. And I was like, that's what I want to talk to her about. And I knew I had wanted to have her on the show since I launched the show because she's in health and wellness and I knew she'd do a good interview. But I was like, I want to be able to connect with her. Like, I don't want to talk about exercise. I don't want to talk about like her new program for moms. I want to talk about something in her story. So I reached out to her and I said, I'd love to have you on the show. Would you be open to it? I didn't even tell her what I wanted to talk about. She said yes. She was so, so sweet. So then I ended up, when I booked her, I sent her a list of questions and the questions were like, so about your divorce.
Yeah. Sneak it in there.
And there was like all these questions about it. And then at the end I was like, let me know if you're not comfortable with any of these.
Yeah.
And she was like, to be honest, I've not talked about this before, but because I just put this on my new website, I think it would actually be like a really interesting conversation. And we had this amazing talk. And it was such a great lesson to me and a reminder to me that like, we just want to hear people's stories and to hear her story. So she shared it with her community and it was like, at that time, it was my biggest interview of that year. And she got such a great response. And so her community was like obsessed with her because she shared this vulnerable story. My community was like, they felt like they got like this juicy scoop, you know? So it was a win-win for everyone. But at the base of it was that she had an opportunity to share her story and how it had impacted her life. And that's where I want to be giving women platforms. And men too, by all means, like how can you embrace your story and connect your story to where you are now and the gifts you're giving the world. And so I think that's where we can be supporting each other more. And whether that's in the professional world or just in our own friendships and recognizing like, wow, this person parents really differently than me, but how were they raised? Maybe they were raised in a household where things were, so you're just questioning people's stories and like learning their stories. And I think that's a huge piece of giving women a platform and giving women the space to women and men to live in their space more authentically and in a bigger way.
I love that. I mean, obviously my whole business is about helping people tell their story. And so, yeah, it's often those nuggets. I remember, so two stories come to mind that I think relate to this. Is one, when I started my business, I'd been in corporate my entire career and I started my business in 2008. And I remember when I launched my consulting business, I had a bunch of my former corporate, not a bunch, I should say a select vocal few of my former corporate colleagues who said, I don't really think you should mention that you do acting on the side or that you were a child actress in your website. Like people might not take you seriously. They might not think you're devoted to the work if they find out you do.
Oh my gosh.
Theater. I know. And I kind of was like, should I be doing this? And then I realized that's stupid because I basically tell stories for a living.
Right.
And also I speak. So that's like key when I'm pitching for speaking engagements is like, hey, I'm not going to freeze up on stage. I'm actually an actress in my spare time. So it's like turning that part of your story. And then the same thing, as you know, when I had my brain injury in 2008, there was sort of like this, do I separate church and state kind of thing, right?
Yeah.
Like, do I tell clients? And it's not like someone comes to me for a proposal and the first thing out of my mouth is like, I had a brain injury. Like, but I mean, I had to learn how to adapt and work differently and like support them, but I'm completely open about that. And, granted, it didn't affect my ability to do my work in a very like overt way. I had to learn how to work differently. But my point is that I've actually attracted more of the right type of client by sharing that story because they're like, I like her bravery. I like her moxie. Like, wow, she's a survivor. Like I want her on my team. Like, and if that doesn't, this is exactly what I teach people about brand. Like if it doesn't resonate with that person, if it's going to turn them off, then that person's not your ideal client or customer or audience or whatever, fan anyway.
Right.
So, like just Kim Kardashian doesn't care that I can't stand her and think like the Kardashians are morally wrong. Like she's got enough fans who like, that's their jam. Right. And so it's the same thing. It's like, be okay with sharing your story. And if it includes motherhood, if it includes you struggling with motherhood, if it includes like, I'm going to be really vulnerable and admit that I don't have this thing figured out.
Yeah.
and share that, because there's a group of people that's going to resonate with, and it's going to endear you more to those people and create more loyalty. And like you said, that's what makes you stand out.
Yeah.
Like 1,000 people have a book they want to promote.
Right.
But what is it that makes you different around that story?
Right.
So I love that you shared that, because I think that's kind of all wrapped up in this whole like motherhood thing, and being open and being vulnerable, and not trying to like hide this part of yourself because I'm at work. Like I can't be a mom because I'm at work,
Right.
So I love that. So kind of to sum up, you mentioned some great tips earlier, but what would be your best piece of advice for people who don't feel like they're giving enough at home and at work? If they feel like they are like failing in both places, someone's sitting in front of you crying, saying like, I suck at being a mom, I suck at being an entrepreneur. Like, what would you tell them when you buy them a latte and give them a hug?
Right. So I would tell them to get really clear on what is most important to them in motherhood and what's most important in entrepreneurship. And so if the most important thing in their business is to, hit a certain number this month or whatever, then when are you putting the time aside to manage that? And what are the specific steps that you're taking? And then also, what are you saying no to so that you don't have the distractions, so that you can really focus on that one thing?
Yeah.
Same thing with your family stuff. What's the most important thing to you in your family life right now? If like being the person that's home to tuck your kids in every night is the most important thing to you, then make that happen. That might mean that you're not the person dropping them off at school in the morning, and it's okay, because if you try to do both, you might be a complete basket case on both ends. And so deciding like what's the priority, and then that will give you the space to be the best person in that space and make it the most meaningful experience. And I think that kind of applies to either, but then recognizing that every time you say yes to one thing, you're saying no to a bunch of other things, and you have to take radical responsibility for those yeses and nos. And so, I know that when I was working evenings, or the first 2 years or so of my son's life, I was working evenings once or twice a week. And it was like, I did not ever go out with girlfriends, because I was like, no, because I'm already gone 2 nights a week. So that's my limit. And I literally like had that limit. I was like, no, I already have my 2 nights booked this week. Then later I only had 1 night booked a week. So I was like, okay, like every once in a while I can do one other night. And I still actually have that boundary where I don't do things. I'm not away from home. I don't miss more than 2 bedtimes a week. And that just because, I'm not saying bedtime's always a joy, but for whatever reason, it's like the magical thing in my head. It doesn't always play out that way, but so yes, that's kind of, those are some of the parameters that I've put in place to just make sure that, the balance that exists in my life, like that's where I find it.
Well, okay. So this is huge, because I've gone on this rant several times over the past few years about the getting good at saying no. And it's not about always, I think where people trip up is they think it's about saying no to things you don't want to do, right? Like, but it also is saying no to things you do want to do. And if you don't have that prioritization for yourself clear in your own head, you're going to end up with a lot of yeses that you feel bad about. And I can't even tell you how many people I've spoken to just in the last month alone. I've spoken to other entrepreneurs who need a project done, like by a web designer or whatever. And a web designer that was too busy, but said yes, and now is effing up the work. Because, you know what I mean? So like, I always say, when you say no to somebody, if you can't go all in, you're actually giving them a gift, because you're allowing them to find the person that's a better fit. Whether that's like a girlfriend asking you to go to a movie, and if you say yes, you're going to feel bad the whole time. You're going to be a crappy companion. You're like going to talk about your kid the whole time, whatever. Or if it's like a work-related thing where it's like, let them find someone who has the time, who has the commitment, who will get it done on time and under budget. So it's, we often, I think especially women, and maybe, you might agree with this, we default to yes, because we want to be people pleasers, right? And we also,
say maybe,
but we
say I'm going to try, but then we know we're not really going to try.
For sure. And it's just being able to get better. And I really believe that the best way to get better at that is to just keep practicing.
Yes.
And like you said, just making sure you're clear on your priorities so that you have that litmus test of, does this fit in my priorities for the week? No, then I'm going to say no to it.
Right. I recently did an episode called The 7 Phrases of Freedom.
Mm-hmm.
And I talked about like forming a concise no.
Mm-hmm.
And I'm someone, because I'm a people pleaser, I'm someone who, if I have to say no to something, I want to give like 13 reasons. Like, I'd really love to do that, but here's 13 reasons why I can't make it work. And some of them are like kind of half truths.
Right.
And like not blatant lies, but like I want to appear that like, things are so crazy and so busy. There's no way I could possibly make this work. The reality is I can just say, no, that doesn't work for me right now.
Exactly.
And it needs to be that concise. And you just need to practice saying that over and over again. And I've gotten so much better about it. And even last weekend, I had an invitation to go do something with some friends that sounded amazing.
Mm-hmm.
But I had already had my 2 nights out of the house for the week. And I started texting back this like long explanation of like, well, here's all the ways this week has been crazy. So I just don't think I can swing it. And then I was like, no, I'm not going to say I don't think I can swing it, because the reality is I'm not going to try to swing it.
You know you can't swing it.
Right. So I said, no, I'm not available. Bummer. That sounds like a lot of fun.
Exactly.
That's it. I don't need to give it. And this was like with one of my best girlfriends. Like, but I don't need to give more than an explanation than that.
Right.
And she still loves me.
Of course. Of course. I'm getting better at that too, especially, honestly, I put a Facebook post out today because it's my son's birthday about how he's taught me more about priorities and patience and negotiation than anything. And it's true. Ever since I've had to be very selective with my time since he was born, I've been getting better at that of like, I don't need to make an excuse. I can just say, and you can be graceful about it. Like exactly what you said. Like, I don't need some external force that's justifying why I'm saying no to you. I can just say, no, that sounds really great. Thank you for inviting me. I can't make it. Right. Boom. End of story.
And I really think it feeds into your self-image and the image, your perceived image with other people as well. When people see you as someone who just is like clear and concise and not apologetic and not talking your way in and out of things and not like, oh, I don't know. Like, no, like if you just have a confident yes or no, that goes a really long way in like every relationship in your life. If everything is this like uncomfortable, unconfident, like weird interaction where you're apologizing 18 times, that's going to really get in your way in all of your relationships at some point. Like you're either going to be a doormat or you're not going to take the risks that you deserve to take or do things that you're for yourself that you really deserve. So, I mean, it's really essential. So
as our parting thought before we get to finding out how we can learn more about you and subscribe to the podcast, what advice would you give to those moms juggling? What's like your final piece of like wisdom that you want to share with entrepreneurial moms who, whether they're just starting out, their kids were just born, or as their kids are getting older, what's kind of the thing you always go back to?
Most recently, the thing in the last like year or two, space and grace. So give yourself space and grace to figure out what you want to do. But also that doesn't mean that you have the excuse of space and grace to not do anything, to not take action for a really long time. So with the space and grace, you also need to have like the radical responsibility of actually taking action. So doing one thing every day that gets you closer to a goal. So space and grace, like figure out what that is. Maybe the one thing every day is like listening to a podcast, reading someone's blog, having coffee with someone who's in an industry you're interested in getting into. So you're doing those action steps. But you're giving yourself the space and grace to kind of get some definition around or parameters around what you want to do. And I mean, that's absolutely what I've been doing with the podcast as I've been building it. Now that I've sold the gym, it's like, I have to take radical responsibility for really going all in on it, but it's really been like every week, what can I do to make this grow a little bit? Because that's all I have the bandwidth to do right now. And I know that at some point I will have the space and grace to make it bigger. And now I'm just entering that season. And so, it's like doing what you can as you can, but also giving yourself the opportunity to like breathe a little through it.
That's a great way to leave things off. Thank you, Sara. So tell everyone how they can find you and stay in touch with you and learn about the podcast.
Sure. So you can find me over at shamelessmom.com, and the podcast is all over there as well. To subscribe to the show, so we have episodes every Monday and Wednesday, and you can subscribe to the show. We're in Apple Podcasts, but if you go to shamelessmom.com/review, that spits you right into our iTunes or our Apple Podcast page, where you can subscribe to the show.
Fabulous. All right. Well, we look forward to more from you. Thank you again for joining us.
Thank you so much. It's been so fun.
Okay, great. And have a great day, everyone.